everybody. Welcome to NBCU Academy's live stream for Women's History Month. We're talking about balancing work and life after milestones. And my name is Sharon Epperson. I'm CNBC Senior Personal Finance Correspondent. And today I'm thrilled to have my NBC colleague, Hallie Jackson, here with us. She is the Senior Washington Correspondent, and she's also a brand new mom. Hallie, it's good to be here with you.
Hi, Sharon. It's great to see you virtually as we're doing everything these days. But I'm so excited to talk about milestones and the idea of how you manage, home life and work life too.
Yeah, it's a lot to manage. And I will say during my time with CNBC, I've had many life milestones from getting married while I was working at CNBC, actually having two children, and also losing my father, and then nearly losing my life with a traumatic brain injury. So there were a lot of milestones that happened, and trying to work through all that has been a lot, but it's also helped inform me of how to work during this challenging time for everybody when we're in this pandemic. You are incredible. I have to tell you, we're just now actually talking to one another for the first time, everybody. So Hallie and I have followed one another, but haven't really had a conversation, except the conversation that I often have with the TV when I watch her, like, oh my God, I hope she's drinking her water. Oh my goodness, I hope oh my gosh, how is she doing? How is she managing all these things? So tell us about your milestone a year ago.
Yeah.
At an incredible time.
Well,
how is your daughter?
She's great. She might make an appearance here. She's going to come down at lunch soon. So we're going to see if we get a little cameo. I am staying hydrated, Sharon. So thank you for your concern.
Good. It was during pregnancy, but it's now too. But I mean, particularly then, because you were going everywhere.
100%. And I'm such a big fan of yours. So I'm so excited we're doing this. I mean, listen, so just by way of background for folks who may not know, I got pregnant in an election year. And at the time, I was the chief White House correspondent covering all things Trump administration. I'm now the senior Washington correspondent for a Washington bureau for NBC News, doing sort of bigger picture, longer form pieces, which has been a blast. So I got pregnant in 2020, had my daughter, I got pregnant in 2019, I guess, had my daughter in 2020, literally the week that everything changed with the pandemic. So I actually wrote about this recently for a series for today.com and a broader series that we did on pandemic moms and pandemic babies. But I talked about how my partner and I went into the hospital in one universe. We knew COVID was an issue. I'd been covering COVID in the task force briefings at the time with Vice President Mike Pence, who was leading those at the moment that it happened. But it hadn't become sort of the pandemic that we all thought it would be until I walked out of the hospital. And that I walked out the day that the WHO declared it a pandemic, the day that Donald Trump, then the president, gave his primetime Oval Office address. Tom Hanks that day announced he got COVID. Remember that? And the NBA suspended its season. And we always talked about like, wow, like when we got home, we were already in kind of this bubble anyway, which you are with a newborn. And here we are in the pandemic. Everybody was in their bubbles, right? And so I talked about how my whole world changed when Monroe, my daughter, was born, but so did everybody else's that same week. Everybody, you, Sharon, started working from home. All of our producers, our teams at NBC News did this massive radical shift away from in-person control rooms and to the virtual universe that we all know so well a year in now. But it was such a shocking change at the time. And for me, it was bizarre because I was so used to sort of having my working hat on, right? 24/7, doing the thing. I was stepping away from that completely for maternity leave, which I was grateful to have. And yet we were in this pandemic that was affecting everybody's lives in this really sort of strange and interesting way. And in many instances, a devastating way. For me personally, I've been very fortunate in that, knock on wood, we've managed to stay healthy. My family has managed to stay healthy. But I was telling one of my girlfriends, I'm in my house now, which we moved into before we got pregnant, knowing we were going to want to get pregnant, hopefully, thinking, great, it has an extra bedroom for my mom to come stay in. When I have the baby, she can come hang out and help and be kind of our childcare helper, so we don't have to do it all by ourselves. Well, that certainly went out the window because she's, in her 60s. She wasn't about to come travel in the middle of COVID times when we didn't know how this thing spread and how that happened. So it was this incredibly sort of scary and bizarre time. We also felt really cocooned in our house. I mean, we weren't leaving with a newborn anyway, and we didn't leave because of COVID, even if we were going to. So we were sort of in our little home bubble here in my house in Washington and stayed that way for many, many months. Only recently have we started to be able to kind of break out of that a little bit. So coming back to work was a big shift. I came back. I knew I wanted to come back if I could in time for the Republican and Democratic conventions in August as a political correspondent. That's kind of like, I knew I was there from the, beginning days of the Trump administration, from inauguration day. And I wanted to be there through election day to see what would happen. And so I came back at the end of August, and that was really jarring too, because everybody else had like a 5-month head start on how to manage working in a pandemic. I was going into the White House every day, or I would travel over to the Hill. I would do my show from home and then go in. And it was scary because to that point, I hadn't so much as, gone to the grocery store. And here I was walking into the White House, which then, as I was covering it, started to become a hot spot of its own, with then Donald Trump getting COVID, a number of staffers getting COVID. I was reporting on and breaking news of people who were getting diagnosed with COVID in the White House. The mask use was pretty spotty. The testing, was questionable. So that was also a transition of like, okay, I'm going to this place. I'm coming home to my, immunocompromised infant. How can I make sure that I'm staying safe? That was a huge question and a huge concern for me. We had a pretty scary incident in December, actually, where I was a close contact with somebody at the White House who tested positive for COVID. Fortunately, they were totally fine, asymptomatic, no issues there. But for 2 weeks, I'm quarantining at home, getting tested all the time. I was staying away from my baby. I was wearing masks around her, which was very bizarre for her. My partner and I were, sleeping in different rooms, eating in different rooms, doing the whole 9 yards. And it was such a reminder of like, wow, the things have consequences that you sometimes don't expect. I knew I was putting myself into a position where potentially I would be at risk, just like any reporter is doing, Sharon, in this moment, right? I think about my colleagues like Gabe Gutierrez, who's on planes flying out of the border this week, who traveling, putting themselves at the epicenter of this. It's a scary risk to take on. And then you're heading back home and bringing those risks back with you. And I think how you manage that was something that I really had to work through for a couple of months.
Yeah. Your first week with Monroe was the time that I realized that I'd been exposed to someone with COVID-19
oh, wow.
In the city when I was going to 30 Rock. And so what you're talking about, this bubble, I was in that bubble too, of then having to spend 2 weeks in a separate room away from my family. My husband saying, don't go to the refrigerator. I'll bring you something. Don't go in the kitchen. I'm like, this is my house. But I was literally in this one room because I wasn't sure. And I thankfully was negative, but you just don't know. And that was
early days. Sharon, right? I mean, we didn't know anything about the virus or how it spread. I mean, that was terrifying.
Exactly. But the thing that really has helped me is, reflecting every time I go through something. Even, I must say, I'm very, very thankful. I don't know if you've done this yet, but I have had my 2 COVID vaccines, and I'm very, very
congratulations.
Happy.
That's great.
Yes, I'm very, very happy about that. But I still don't like needles, don't like anything to do with seeing blood or a needle or anything like that, particularly after being in the hospital. But you would think after spending a month in a hospital after brain surgery that I would be okay with it. But I must say, I mean, it is the most simple, Hallie, simple.
I'm shocked to hear you say this.
But I was like saying to myself, don't be scared you had brain surgery. Don't be scared you had brain surgery. You can get through this. And that is also what has kind of guided me through this pandemic. And it's not just having to have something, a medical emergency like I had, but people have gone through unexpected things in their lives where now this pandemic, yes, it's unexpected. And many people, are really at odds at how to try to deal with it. Right. But there are others who are going back to situations that they've already dealt with, saying, if I could get through that, I can get through this. And I think even if it's not on the scale of the pandemic, I think everyone needs to kind of try to think of something that you've gone through that can kind of give you some guidance, some support and some comfort for what you're doing now and how you're dealing with it. When you were talking about just figuring out how you were going to get back to work. After being out of work for a year, I had a ruptured brain aneurysm in 2016. So talking about the world changing, I had participated in the Republican presidential debate that CNBC had in October of 2015. In September of 2016, I have this ruptured brain aneurysm, which is basically a vessel in your brain explodes. That's what happened. And so I had to have surgery to repair that. I was in a hospital for over a month. And when I kind of came to and I was conscious pretty soon on, but really realized what was happening, I said, wait, what's happening with this election? Where are we going? Wow. I was so blown away. It was almost like I woke up in a different world with, leadership that, when I focused on the new president, because I was getting better by January of 2017, I thought, this is not the world I was in September in any way, shape, or form. And now I'm having to figure out, how do I come back to work as a journalist in an industry that Washington, or at least the leadership in the White House, doesn't seem to love all that much, but I've loved it for 20 years. How do I come back to trying to work the schedules that we work as journalists, and not really being able to stay alert and awake and really not get tired for more than a couple hours a day?
How did you manage that?
Fashion everything.
I'm curious, because I think in our industry, there's so much, and I think folks, who might be watching that are interested in getting into journalism, it is truly, I mean, for many of us, it's 24/7, right? Or if not, it's at least like 23/6. Like, it's a lot. And I wonder, for you, managing the physicality of it, managing sort of the mental and emotional strain of it, even as you're recuperating from just this massive thing that had happened to you, how did you figure out in those first couple of months, how to kind of come back and perform, if you will, in your job?
Well, I didn't figure it out in the first couple of months. I think my doctors kind of said, you can't. I mean, I have a video my husband took, just probably to show me how ridiculous I looked when I was in the hospital with my 2 phones, calling American Express to deal with our own personal bills while I was checking email. And what was I doing? I wasn't going on air tomorrow. I was going to be in the hospital for another several weeks. So, and when I came home, it was wanting to stay on top of the news, but finding it very difficult to process and be inundated with all that information.
Yeah.
So in my case, I had to take it very, very slow and gradually ramp up to being confident enough that I could return to work. And it took a full year for that to happen. So that's when when I'm talking to people who are looking at various different jobs, various different industries, you don't go into it thinking, is this going to be the type of company that I can come back to if something happens to me? But this is the type of company that you can come back to if something happens to you. And I'm so very fortunate. And as I go around speaking and meeting people of all ages who have had various traumatic injuries, traumatic brain injuries, and others who are working on their own, who are working for a startup, who are working at places where they don't have disability insurance or comprehensive health insurance, where they don't have a plan that allows them to help them save money. It can be devastating. It can be so devastating. So that's what's been, really interesting, being able to be somewhere that is that supportive. I don't know when you got the title for this, Hallie, what you thought, but when I read it and I said, balancing work and life after milestones, I don't really feel like there's any balance. And I don't know very many people in this pandemic that feel like there's a balance. There are priorities. And what I think we have to really focus on more is stop trying to beat ourselves up because we can't we can't balance it. We just need to prioritize it. And we need to be, I think, upfront with our colleagues, with our managers, as much as we can, about what our priorities are, because then I think there's a greater understanding. So again, watching you and literally sending prayers up every time I saw you all over the world, pregnant, trying to manage everything. How did you approach it? How did you kind of figure out when you were pregnant? And then since you've had Monroe, how you're prioritizing your work and your life?
So 2 things on this topic. I think number one, and actually since we're talking about Monroe, she just happened to make her lunch appearance. So I'm gonna have her say hello really quickly before she goes back up. Hey babe, you want to say hi to people? Hello.
Hi, Monroe.
She's wearing a shirt. My colleague, I actually didn't expect her. Kelly O'Donnell, who is the one of the White House correspondents for NBC, made her this custom little Monroe onesie. Hi.
That is so awesome.
So thank you, Aunt Kelly, for the onesie. Making your national debut. Okay, I love you. You're gonna go, Dad? All right. I mean, talk about priorities. That little ball of sweetness right there is one. I think so. So for me, I've always felt like I have kind of probably a warped perspective of this idea of balance, right? Because for me, in my entire career, I've never felt like I wanted 50-50 balance. I didn't want that. It just wasn't. I love my job and I love my life, but I was like digging, my balance was like 95-5 earlier in my career. And I was totally okay with that. That's what I wanted it to be. I was like, I'm going to go hardcore at work. I love this. I'm having a great time. I'm going to kind of do this, take my time off when I can. But my balance was certainly not 50-50. Even now, I still feel like my balance is nowhere near 50-50 because I don't want it to be. And I think that's one thing that I try to tell sort of folks that I talk to who come asking these kinds of questions is figure out what your balance is, right? If you like a balance, it is much more 50-50. And that's what you're comfortable with. Putting in 8 hours at work, being able to have time at home. I know people like that. I have family members who that is what they want out of their lives. And that works for them. And that's great. What works for me is different. What works for you, Sharon, is going to be different than that. And what works for somebody else is going to be different too. So I encourage people to think about what kind of balance do you want? I will say journalism requires you to skew your balance towards work, I think, more. I think I think a lot of journalists, or I guess I'll speak for myself, that's okay because I like it. And that's kind of a requirement of the job. When news breaks, you don't get to delay it and say, well, I have a birthday party or something, right? Like that's just how these things kind of go. That said, one thing that I really thought about a lot when I was hoping to get pregnant, and when Frank and I, my partner and I, who actually also happens to work for NBC News, were talking about this was, when you get to be in your mid 30s, right? Like there's a thing that you think about of, I may not be able to get pregnant easily. I may not be able to get pregnant quickly. Like, I don't know how long this is going to last. Like when you're which is a different conversation than what you might have if you're looking to get pregnant in your mid 20s, which I was not. I was doing my own thing then. And I remember us having the conversation many times, actually, as we were having this conversation about our timing and what we wanted in our future, about can you really get pregnant in an election year? And there was this idea that came externally, I think, from people, very well-meaning people, but the idea like, well, of course you'd wait, right? And I'm thinking like, my God, like I'm going to be 36. Like, I don't know. Like, and I know that not everybody, there are challenges that kind of come with that just biologically. It's just a fact. It's something that happens. And we made the decision. I was like, you know what? Like, life is short. Like life is short. You don't know what's going to happen. We're just going to have to roll the dice and see what's up. We ended up being very sort of fortunate in that we got pregnant and I was going to be on leave and come back in time for, what I thought was the end of the primary and the beginning of the general. Of course, then the pandemic hits. But I remember before we really got pregnant, we were about to sort of start that process. And the then president at the time went on a trip to a Zika zone. He was holding a summit with Kim Jong-un. I think it was Singapore. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, Zika was an issue. This is before COVID. And I could either not go. I hadn't told anybody we were trying to get pregnant, or I could go and then delay trying to get pregnant. And I remember sitting on the floor of my living room here, like really struggling, a little bit of tears coming down, thinking like, this is the first of 20 million decisions of this idea of balance or figuring out priorities and like work versus life. And I just think back on that because it was such a vivid thing where I was like, oh, this is what women talk about. This is what people mean when they talk about it.
It's constant.
Okay. Yeah.
You're making these decisions and asking yourself these questions all the time. I mean, for me, I think my balance has always wanted to be more toward 50-50. My mother was a stay-at-home mom during the time she was raising me, but worked full-time before I was born and then worked full-time as soon as I went off to college, as she reminded me every day to pay for my college. That's why she went back to work. And so I had that kind of in my mind. But I think the fact that my son, who is 18, when he was born, he almost was born in the newsroom of CNBC because my water broke during a stand-up.
Oh my God.
So, there sometimes something happens where it's like, you may think you want to do this more, but I'm here to tell you that right now, this is your priority. And this is
100%. Your body was literally telling you,
telling me which way to go. And when my daughter was born, I realized that I did want to, again, have more control over my schedule. Didn't want to have, we know that we have to be ready anytime, but the breaking news and all of that, I needed to have some type of schedule, and working, actually covering the markets at that time, because they weren't as 24/7 as they are right now. I worked at the commodities exchange so that I knew at the time that the commodities floor trading ended at 2:30. I was like, oh my God. This is great. They're not going to want to talk about commodities till like 7 o'clock at night. And we didn't have a program at the time that would do that anyway. So it was just perfect for scheduling. So I literally picked what I wanted to cover as a journalist.
That's smart.
Because of what I was doing at home as a mom. That said, I still didn't see my daughter for 8 years in the morning. And my husband took over that part of getting her to school and all of that. And so the other day we were talking about something, and I said, oh, you say, sometimes my kids will say, Mom, that's not because of the brain injury. You were always like that. You're doing that thing again. And I said, is that what I'm doing? She's like, well, really, I can't really say because you weren't home as much then. I didn't really know. And my heart broke, and I'm like,
going to say that's like an emotional thing to hear.
You can't have the regrets for the time away, but that's why this time during the pandemic, when we're forced to be together for better or worse, has been so precious to me because I have that time with them. But I wanted to ask you this because,
well, let me just say one thing, because you're bringing up something that I think is really interesting. And it's the idea of going back to the idea of priorities. And I want to share this because it was super powerful for me. And of course, I read it on like an Instagram thing somewhere, and I have no good sourcing from it. So forgive me, because like a good journalist would never do this. But it was the idea of we're all juggling so much. But thinking about it like this, some balls that you're juggling are glass and some balls are plastic. And sometimes those balls change, right? And every day for me, that's how I think about it. I think, is this a glass ball right now, or is it a plastic ball? And sometimes it's a glass ball and sometimes it's not. And it's like, if you can let it drop, that's okay. Like and it has helped me focus so much on like, okay, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, or like literally, I mean, truly the other day, it was like we had a crazy week. I did like 5 shoots in 3 days. I was gone a ton. I come home. I like could not make dinner. You know, we put a frozen pizza in the oven. Like, I didn't even know we had frozen pizza in the freezer, you know, and I had a pile of laundry sitting in the room. And I thought, you know what, this laundry is a plastic ball. Like that, I can let that drop. You know what I mean? Whereas at other times I might think like, I need to clean this space because it's going to help me get clarity, whatever. Like, it's just constantly thinking like that. What's glass and what's plastic? Anyways, I just want to share that because I think it's great.
And that's the best way to do this kind of academic assessment that I remember I had to do when I was in graduate school. I had to take this class on professional development. And one of the things we had to do was a self-assessment, you know, kind of what are your priorities? What kind of job do you like? Do you want to be in an office? Do you want to travel a lot? Do you want to be near family? Do you want to be somewhere where they do have great family leave? Do they, you know, all these different questions to ask yourself. And at the time I was like, why do I need this? I'm single. I want to work hard. I want to get a great job. Hopefully it'll have great benefits too. And that's my goal. And what I was told, and now what I tell my students, because I teach this class at Columbia now, is that you do this every 6 months, maybe even every 3 months, your life changes. And so what I said I wanted when I first joined CNBC, what I said I wanted after I first got married, what I said I wanted after the first child, then the second child, you know, all of it can change. And what's great is to be somewhere where the company pivots too. The company's growing too. The company's becoming more creative too. This, what we're doing today, Hallie, didn't exist, right? There was no NBCU Academy for us when we were starting here to be able to ask questions, to be able to say, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, do I want to go into news or should I look at, you know, they have a great product development team there too. Should I go there? Which way should I go? And now we have these resources. So it's really interesting to kind of look at what your personal priorities are, but also where you're working. What are their priorities? Do they want to grow? Or are they stuck just doing the same thing? Are they narrow focused, or are they really thinking broadly? All those things are really, I think, important as you're looking at where you want to go and what you want to do. Having Monroe in the middle of a pandemic, I guess it's kind of hard to say, have your priorities change because of the pandemic? Because no, it's because of Monroe maybe. But what have you seen, you know, since you've been back to work, after coming back to work in August of last year, has your work life changed? Like, what is the day in the life of Hallie like?
So that's an interesting question, Sharon. I think it speaks to actually something totally different, which is that I was in a very fortunate position after 5 years really covering Donald Trump and longer than that covering Republican politics, where I sort of stepped back and had an opportunity, and NBC gave me this opportunity, said, hey, we'd love to kind of give you this promotion to the senior Washington correspondent role. And it ended up being like an upgrade. I was telling a girlfriend of mine, like in every facet, like not just professionally, but personally as well. I loved covering the White House. It was awesome. It was, as you say, like around the world, constant travel, you know, constant everything. It was amazing and challenging in so many ways. I also have other muscles that I, you know, frankly wanted to stretch. And so for me, the biggest change with work life has been this new role. And that's been since Inauguration Day. So it's only been like, I don't know, 50 days, right? 60 days. Is that how long Joe Biden's been in office now? So I'm still kind of adjusting to it. But for me, that's actually been the biggest shift, because my work-life balance did not change when I came back to work after maternity leave in the pandemic, because I still had, you know, 3 jobs, basically. I was doing, you know, everything in the morning for my show. I was doing it from home. That actually was a huge change and a nice benefit, in that I had breakfast at home every day. I went from 4 years of eating breakfast in my car on the way to work some days, or at my desk, you know what I mean, before doing the show, to I would have breakfast in my kitchen with my family and then go and prep for the show. And that was really cool. I mean, it sounds silly, but like we don't have family dinner because Monroe eats so early. We would have family breakfast every morning. Now, it was family breakfast half the time I'm on phone calls, but it was still kind of cool to be able to sit and eat with everybody. So that's been something that's changed. But I was still then running to the White House every day or running to wherever, doing stories, doing nightly, et cetera, coming home, scripting for the next day, whatever the case may be. And so in this, for me, the biggest change in my work-life balance has been, or just my work-life period, has been having sort of more time. I'm, for example, developing, the concept development phase of this new show we're launching for Peacock and NBC News Now, which has been super gratifying. I've never developed a show and helped launch it from the ground up before. And that's been awesome because I'm interested in sort of the business development side of things. So that's been really cool, and spending sort of time thinking about those kinds of things. I'm getting involved with some of these cross-platform projects that NBC News is doing. So for example, for the first anniversary of COVID, we did that big 5-part series on pandemic moms. Working on another one I'm really excited about, time to the Capitol siege, that I hopefully will be able to share more about in the coming weeks. So just working on kind of in projects that are sort of expansive, bookings for my show on MSNBC. And so it's been just this very different life of like, oh, I don't have to race into the car and go and kind of crank on the hamster wheel. I'm stepping back and thinking about how can I put projects together in interesting ways. So for me, that's been the biggest change. It actually has nothing to do really with the pandemic or with Monroe. It just has a function to do with the job. But that's
part of what is great about being able to grow in your job and in the years that you've been, with NBC, and being able to grow and now do a job that's so important. And again, on the cutting edge of things that we're doing with Peacock and NBC News Now. But it's something that also fits into your family life. And I had the same experience when, a couple of years ago when I stopped covering commodities and left being on the floor of an exchange every day and having 10
why did you what triggered that shift for you?
What triggered the shift was there was a real interest for CNBC to do more personal finance reporting, and it literally happened in like 2 days. Would you mind coming back to headquarters full time? And it took no time for me to say absolutely yes, because it gave me a chance to spend more time at home. I went from a 3-hour commute, round trip every day, to an hour and a half maybe to get to CNBC versus going into the city all the way downtown to the Commodities Exchange in New York City. And it also gave me a chance to cover what I'd been talking about kind of on my own. I'd written a book about couples and money. So I've been following this, even though I'm covering something very different. I'd done a lot of stuff on the Today Show about personal finance. So now I was able to do it for CNBC, and like you, be able to do it for shows that weren't daily shows with the same kind of watching the market and feeding the market type of pace, but our nightly show that we had, a nightly business report that we had for a while, and then also a weekend show that aired on a number of syndicated stations. So that definitely helped me focus on something I was passionate about already. And then also be able to spend time with my family. And because personal finance is more personal than finance, bringing in kind of my own life experiences and those of other people really helped to inform my coverage. So
did you ever feel or grapple?
Now too. Yeah.
Oh, because I'm so sorry, Sharon. Speaking of my Roomba just started, so I need to go turn that off. I'm so sorry. It just suddenly turned on. So it's going to make a lot of noise here.
This is what balancing it or prioritizing is all about in this kind of pandemic. Before we started, I had to knock on the door. Someone had a question, probably about some type of high school assignment, but I'm live right now until I told them 12:30. We're almost here. So now, I'll get to go back and read an essay or something that we have to do. Right. But we're all doing that. We're all juggling. And I think that keeping those balls in the air and then allowing some to fall the way that you described is so perfect. It applies to everything, not just
I think it's so much, right?
It applies to everyone who is trying to figure out, where do I want to go with my career? How can I advance in my career? And is it time to look for something different in my career? All of those things, are valid questions to be asking right now. Is there any final thing you wanted to say? We're about to run out of time, and you have a call you got to take.
No, I was just going to say, to your point, and I think this ties nicely to what you just are talking about here, the idea of finding a place that fits with your culture, right? And I think that can be hard when you're coming into a business and you don't know what the culture of a place is, because, in some places, I think the culture is very much like it's work before all else, right? And there is not a lot of understanding or flexibility. I think even within a company, you can find pockets where there's different cultures inside of a company. And so I think that one of the things that I tell people is, think about the kind of culture you want to be a part of, and whether it's a cultural fit, because it's got to be a right fit for the job, but it's also got to be a right fit culturally for you. And I think that's something that people don't often think about in the process when they're looking for those jobs out of college.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed hearing from us. I've enjoyed talking to you, Hallie, finally. So now we have
I want to do it again. Can we do it with some wine? Like, just
I know we have to do it. We're going to do it again. We're going to do our own version. Sorry, everybody. You won't be invited. It's just going to be us. But I'm looking forward to another conversation really, really soon. And I hope you all are looking forward to another conversation, because next week there's another live stream. NBCU Academy will have another live stream on advancing in the newsroom. So maybe some of what they're talking about next week, what we've talked about today, will help to inform the questions that you might have and the thoughts you might have as you're listening to the live stream next week. But Hallie, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for watching.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks all.
Take care.